welcome back to our course on modern web development. In our previous lesson, we learned about routing in Next.js, using the app router and how to style our components using Tailwind CSS. Today we're going to explore data fetching in Next.js 14, which is a very important part of building dynamic applications. Next.js provides powerful data fetching capabilities, allowing us to fetch data on the server and the client, cache responses, and revalidate data to keep our application up to date. So today we're going to cover how to fetch data on the server using the fetch API, how to cache and like different strategies and revalidation. Also, we're going to explore fetching data on the client when necessary, data fetching patterns to optimize performance, and how to use server actions to handle data mutations and form submissions. So let's dive in and see how we can implement data fetching in our Next.js application. So first, let's learn how to fetch data on the server using the fetch API. In Next.js 14, the fetch API has been extended to allow us to configure caching and revalidation for each request. So when we use fetch inside a server component, the data fetching happens on the server, and we can take advantage of server-side rendering. Let's create a new page that fetches data from an external API. Let's go to GitHub Codespaces now, and displays a list of users. So we'll use the JSON placeholder API for demonstration purposes. And now we should create a new folder called users inside our app directory. So create a new folder and call it users. And inside of that folder, create a page.js file. And simply go to our lesson and add the starter code right here. So basically what it does, this code fetches a list of users from an external API and displays them on the page. Since we're using fetch inside the server component, so page.js is a server component by default, because we didn't say it at the beginning like that we have to use client, so it gonna use server by default, and the data fetching happens on the server. So let's start the development server and navigate to localhost 3000 /users to see our user list. So I already started the server right here, and if we go to users route here, we will see the users that are fetched that are being fetched from the external API. So this API, and if we go to this link, we will see like a bunch of users in the JSON format. So this is just an example to give us some starter code. And so once again, you should see a list of users displayed, already styled with Tailwind CSS, because I did some classes before the lesson. And fetching data on the server allows us to pre-render the page with data, improving performance and website SEO, which is gonna rank us higher on the Google compared to other websites. Also, Next.js automatically caches their responses from fetch in the data cache on the server. By default, it uses the force cache option, which caches the data indefinitely. But sometimes we want our data to be updated periodically, so like every 10, 20, or 30 seconds. And we can actually set up a time-based revalidation to refetch the data after a certain interval. So now let's modify our fetch call to revalidate the data every 10 seconds. We're simply gonna add next revalidate and put an interval here. So as you can see, after the fetch function, we're putting next revalidate 10. So basically what it says that we're telling Next.js to revalidate the cached data every 10 seconds. This means that every 10 seconds the next request will fetch fresh data. Likewise, we can opt out of caching by setting cache no store in the fetch options. So the example would be deleting this revalidate option and putting cache no store. So basically what it does, it's sets and ensures that the data is fetched fresh on every request, which can be useful for frequently changing data. We can also implement on-demand revalidation using server's actions or route handlers, but we'll cover this later. Now let's see how we can fetch data from a database or an ORM. So Suppose we have a local database or an ORM like Prisma, which is a very useful service that I'm using personally. So okay, we can fetch data directly from it on our server components. Let's simulate fetching data from a local data source, so to not make things complicated for now. Let's create a new file under our app folder. So okay, first we're gonna create a new folder called data, and under the data folder we're gonna create a new file and name it users.js, and we're gonna simply add a bunch of users. So we're gonna set up a local database. So let's give them ID of 1, name value of John Doe, email, we're also gonna give them the city. So, and yeah, we can just like add a bunch of users here, just change the IDs, and we're gonna keep it like this for now. And now we're gonna update our users folder and update it as follows. So in this example, we're importing users from a local data file. In real application, you would fetch data from a database using an ORM. So yeah, again, I just created a local random database right inside our file to just show it in this example. So yeah, by default, Next.js will attempt to statically render this page at build time. And if you want to prevent this and ensure the data is fetched on each request, we can add something called export const dynamic equals to force dash dynamic at the top of the file. By setting dynamic to force dash dynamic, we tell Next.js to render this page dynamically on every request, which is useful when data changes frequently or depends on request specific data. Next.js provides flexibility in how we fetch and cache data, allowing us to optimize our application based on our needs. So if we go back to our application, and the data is being fetched from our local database and displays those 3 users that we defined earlier. Okay, so while fetching data on the server is recommended in Next.js for performance and CEO benefits, there are some cases, however, where fetching data on the client makes more sense. For example, if you have data that depends on user interactions or requires access to the browser's APIs, you might fetch it on the client. And now let's create a client component that fetches data when it mounts. So now we're going to create a new file under our components folder, and we're going to call it posts list.js. Simply copy the starter code from our lesson, and as you can see, we imported use client on the top to communicate with the server that we're gonna use it as a client. So in this client component, we're using useEffect to fetch data when the component mounts, and we use useState to manage the state of the posts. And now let's use this component in a page. So create a new page under the post folder. So create a new folder here and call it posts. And create a new page.js. And import, don't forget to import posts list from the components that we just defined. And we're simply gonna export a function called post page with some Tailwind classes that just displays the post list that we defined earlier. So if we go to localhost 3000 posts, you should see the list of posts fetched on the client. So let's just delete this, and instead of users, let's navigate to posts. And now it goes through loading state, and yeah, we should see the list of posts fetched on the client. So fetching data on the client can lead to a less optimal user experience, as the data is not available during the initial page load. It's important to consider when client-side fetching is appropriate. In general, prefer server-side data fetching when possible, because it makes it way faster to fetch data from external databases and APIs. Now let's talk about data fetching patterns. So Next.js supports different data fetching patterns, including sequential and parallel data fetching. So sequential data fetching. This is when data fetching depends on previous data. For example, you need to fetch a user's details before fetching their posts. And parallel data fetching, this is when you can fetch multiple data sources simultaneously, improving performance. So to demonstrate this, let's create a new page under the dashboard folder. So create a new page. And we're gonna copy the starter code from our lesson. 1 second. So here in this example, we're initiating both fetch calls simultaneously and then awaiting them together using promise period all right here. This allows both requests to happen in parallel, reducing the overall data fetching time. Parallel data fetching can significantly improve performance when multiple data sources are needed. On the other hand, sequential data fetching might be necessary when one request depends on the result of another. So understanding those patterns helps us optimize our application. And if we go to our server here, and instead of post, we're gonna navigate to dashboard, we should see how the data is being fetched now. Also, Next.js 14 introduces server actions, which allow us to handle data mutations and form submissions on the server seamlessly. So let's implement a simple form to add a new post using server actions. First, we'll create a form where users can submit a new post. So create a new file without a folder and just name it actions.js. Paste this code from our lesson and create a new page under the post folder. So let's find our post folder. Yeah, and create a new folder and call it new. And under the new, just create a new page.js. And go to our lesson and copy this code, paste it here, and in this form we use the action attribute to specify the server action create post, and when the form is submitted, the create post function is called on the server, receiving the form data object. Server actions allow us to handle form submissions and data mutations without writing API routes or using client-side JavaScript. And if we go to post new, we should see the form, how we can like create a new post and submit it. So yeah, after submitting, the post is created via a post request to the external API, and we can also implement error handling and validation within our server actions. So yeah, that's pretty much how the using server actions for mutation works. Let's do a little practice exercise to reinforce what we've learned today. So the exercise would be creating a page that fetches and displays a list of photos and implementing caching with revalidation. So the step 1 would be create a photos folder under the app directory, add a page.js that fetches photos from JSON placeholder photos, which you're gonna see in the example lesson, like all the links and example code. After that, display the photos in a grid, showing the thumbnail and title, and implement time-based revalidation to refresh the data every 30 seconds. And the last step would be styling the page using Tailwind CSS. I'll give you a few minutes to try this out. Okay, hope you're still here and you implemented all the steps. And once again, for the solutions, you can refer to our lesson, which has all the links and example code for this exercise. Great work today, guys. Let's recap what we've just learned. So fetching data on the server using the fetch API in server components. We talked about caching and revalidation, fetching data on the client, when and how to fetch data in client components. Also, we talked about data fetching patterns, sequential and parallel data fetching to optimize performance. And we went through server actions, so how to handle data mutations and form submissions on the server. Feel free to continue experimenting with the data fetching in your own projects. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or our team using our social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. So thank you once again and see you in the next lesson. Happy hacking!